My name is Sarah, and this is the story of how I went from being completely cut off from my father to becoming the person he depended on most. It's a story about forgiveness, second chances, and discovering that family bonds can survive even the deepest wounds. It was a humid Tuesday morning in July 2019 when I made the decision that would destroy my relationship with my father. I was sitting in my small apartment in Austin, Texas, staring at my laptop screen, my hands trembling as I typed the email that would change everything. The subject line read, "Dad, I'm dropping out of medical school." I had spent 3 years at Baylor College of Medicine, 3 years of sleepless nights, endless studying, and mounting debt. But more than that, I had spent 3 years trying to live someone else's dream. My father, Dr. Richard Morrison, had been a successful cardiologist in Houston for over 30 years. He had built his entire identity around his profession, and from the time I could walk, he made it clear that I would follow in his footsteps. "The Morrison name means something in medicine, Sarah," he used to tell me during our Sunday dinners at his sprawling house in River Oaks. "Your grandfather was a doctor, I'm a doctor, and you will be too. It's our legacy." But as I sat in that cramped apartment, surrounded by medical textbooks that felt like prison walls, I knew I couldn't continue living a lie. My passion wasn't in medicine, it was in social work. I wanted to help people, yes, but in a different way. I wanted to work with families in crisis, with children who had nowhere else to turn. I had been volunteering at a local community center throughout medical school, and those few hours each week were the only times I felt truly alive. The response to my email came within an hour. My phone rang, and I saw my father's name on the screen. My heart pounded as I answered. Sarah Elizabeth Morrison. His voice was cold, controlled, the voice he used with difficult patience. "What is the meaning of this ridiculous email?" "Dad," I tried to explain in the message, "I'm not happy in medical school. I want to pursue social work instead. I've already been accepted to UT's graduate program and—" "Social work?" he interrupted, his voice rising. "Social work? Do you have any idea how much money I've invested in your education? How much I've sacrificed? And you want to throw it all away to become a social worker?" I could hear the disdain in his voice, the way he said social worker, like it was something dirty. "Dad, it's not throwing it away. It's following my passion. I want to make a difference in—" "Don't you dare talk to me about making a difference," he shouted. "I've saved thousands of lives. I've built something meaningful. And you want to waste your intelligence on some bleeding heart nonsense." The conversation escalated quickly from there. Words were said that couldn't be taken back. He called me ungrateful, irresponsible, a disappointment. In my anger and hurt, I told him he was controlling and that I was tired of living in his shadow. The call ended with him saying something that would echo in my mind for years to come. "If you walk away from medicine, you walk away from this family. You're no longer my daughter." The line went dead. I sat in my apartment for hours afterward, staring at my phone, expecting it to ring again, expecting him to call back and apologize, to say he didn't mean it. But the call never came. The next few weeks were a blur of paperwork and life changes. I officially withdrew from medical school, losing my scholarship and facing a mountain of student loan debt. I enrolled in UT's social work program and found a part-time job at a local nonprofit to help pay my bills. I moved to an even smaller apartment, trading the dreams of a comfortable future as a doctor for the uncertain path of following my heart. I tried reaching out to my father several times during those first few months. I called, I texted, I even drove to Houston once and stood outside his office building, hoping to catch him between appointments. But he wouldn't see me. His secretary, Mrs. Chen, who had known me since I was a child, would just shake her head sadly and tell me he was busy. The holidays were the hardest. Thanksgiving came and went without the traditional family gathering. Christmas felt hollow and empty. I spent New Year's Eve alone in my apartment, wondering if I had made the biggest mistake of my life. My mother had passed away from cancer when I was 16, and my father and I had grown closer during those difficult years. We were all each other had. Now, it felt like I had lost both parents, one to death, one to pride and disappointment. But I pressed on with my studies. I threw myself into my coursework, learning about family systems, trauma-informed care, and community resources. I discovered I had a natural talent for connecting with people who were struggling, for seeing past their anger and pain to the hurt underneath. My professors noticed my dedication, and I quickly became one of the top students in my program. During my field placement at Child Protective Services, I worked with families that were torn apart by addiction, poverty, and abuse. I saw children who had been abandoned by their parents, and parents who were fighting desperately to get their children back. Every case reminded me of my own family situation, how quickly love could turn to resentment, how pride could destroy relationships that should have been unbreakable. One case in particular struck close to home. I was working with a 15-year-old girl named Maria, whose father had kicked her out of the house after she told him she was pregnant. She was living in a group home, scared and alone, convinced that her father would never forgive her. He said I was dead to him, she told me during one of our sessions, tears streaming down her face. How do you come back from that? I found myself thinking about my father as I helped Maria navigate her situation. Was he thinking about me? Did he miss our Sunday dinners? Did he regret the harsh words we had exchanged? 2 years passed. I graduated with my master's in social work and landed a full-time position at the same nonprofit where I'd been working part-time. I was making a difference in people's lives, just as I had hoped. I had helped reunite families, connected struggling parents with resources, and advocated for children who had no one else in their corner. But despite my professional success, there was always an emptiness inside me. I would see fathers and daughters together, at the grocery store, at restaurants, walking through the park, and feel a sharp pang of loss. I missed him. I missed our conversations about everything and nothing. I missed his terrible dad jokes and his obsession with the Houston Astros. I missed feeling like I belonged somewhere, like I was part of something bigger than myself. I had tried to build a new family of sorts with my colleagues and friends, but it wasn't the same. There's something irreplaceable about the people who knew you before you knew yourself, who remember your first steps and your first words. My father was the only person left who remembered my mother's laugh, who could tell me stories about what I was like as a baby. As I settled into my new life, I often wondered if he ever thought about reaching out. Did he regret cutting me off? Was he proud of the work I was doing, even if it wasn't what he had planned for me? Or had he truly written me off, erased me from his life as completely as if I had never existed? I was about to find out that pride and stubbornness can only hold back love for so long. And sometimes, it takes a crisis to remind us what really matters. The call that would change everything came on a rainy Thursday evening in March 2022, almost 3 years after our last conversation. I was at home, working on case notes, when my phone rang. I didn't recognize the number, but something made me answer. Is this Sarah Morrison? The voice was professional, clinical. Yes, this is Sarah. This is Dr. Patricia Williams from Houston Methodist Hospital. I'm calling about your father, Dr. Richard Morrison. He's been admitted to our emergency department, and you're listed as his emergency contact. My heart stopped. What happened? Is he okay? He suffered a stroke this afternoon. He's stable now, but... Miss Morrison, I think you should come to the hospital as soon as possible. I was in my car within minutes, driving through the rain toward Houston, toward the man who had disowned me 3 years earlier. As I gripped the steering wheel, my mind raced with questions and fears. Would he want to see me? Would he even recognize me? And more importantly, was I ready to face him after all this time? The drive from Austin to Houston had never felt longer. With every mile, I was traveling not just toward my father, but toward a reckoning with the past 3 years of silence, hurt, and stubborn pride. I had no idea what I would find when I arrived at the hospital, but I knew one thing for certain. Despite everything that had happened between us, he was still my father, and I was still his daughter. The storm outside seemed to mirror the turmoil in my heart as I made my way through the night, toward whatever waited for me in that hospital room. The fluorescent lights of Houston Methodist Hospital were harsh and unforgiving as I walked through the corridors at 11:30 p.m. The familiar smell of antiseptic brought back memories of visiting my father at work when I was younger. How proud I used to feel walking beside him as other doctors and nurses greeted him with respect and admiration. Now, that same smell filled me with dread. Dr. Williams met me at the nurses' station on the 4th floor. She was a petite woman in her 50s with kind eyes behind wire-rimmed glasses. "Miss Morrison, I'm Dr. Williams. Thank you for coming so quickly." "How is he?" I asked, my voice barely above a whisper. She gestured for me to sit in a small family consultation room. "Your father suffered what we call an ischemic stroke. A blood clot blocked an artery in his brain. We were able to administer clot-busting medication, which has helped minimize the damage, but..." She paused, choosing her words carefully. "He's experienced some paralysis on his left side, and his speech has been affected. The next few days will be critical in determining the extent of his recovery." I felt like the floor had dropped out from under me. My father, who had always been so strong, so confident, so in control of everything around him, was lying in a hospital bed, unable to speak properly or move half of his body. "Can I see him?" I asked. Dr. Williams hesitated. "Miss Morrison, I need to be honest with you. When the paramedics brought him in, he was conscious and alert. When I asked if we should call anyone, he initially said no. It was only when I pressed him about emergency contacts that he reluctantly gave me your name. He seemed conflicted about it." My heart sank. Even in a medical emergency, he wasn't sure he wanted me there. "But," Dr. Williams continued, "I think he needs you more than he's willing to admit. He has no other family listed in his records, and from what I understand, he's been quite isolated socially in recent years." She led me down the hallway to room 407. Through the small window in the door, I could see him lying in the hospital bed, looking smaller and more fragile than I had ever seen him. His usually perfectly styled gray hair was disheveled, and his face was slack on the left side. Machines surrounded him, monitoring his every heartbeat and breath. I stood frozen outside that door for what felt like an eternity. Part of me wanted to turn around and leave, to avoid the potential confrontation or rejection that might be waiting inside. But the larger part of me, the part that remembered being a little girl who worshipped her daddy, pushed me forward. I knocked softly and entered the room. His eyes were closed, but they fluttered open at the sound of the door. When he saw me, a complex mix of emotions crossed his face. Surprise, confusion, and something that might have been relief. "Hi, Dad," I said softly, approaching his bed cautiously. He tried to speak, but the words came out slurred and difficult to understand. Sarah, why are you..." "I'm your emergency contact, remember?" I pulled a chair close to his bed and sat down. "Dr. Williams called me." He closed his eyes, and I saw a tear slip down his cheek. When he opened them again, he was looking at me with an expression I had never seen before: vulnerability, fear, and something that looked like regret. "I'm sorry, Dad," I said, reaching out to touch his hand, then pulling back, unsure if he would welcome the contact. "I'm so sorry this happened to you." He struggled to form words, his right hand moving restlessly across the blanket. Finally, he managed to say, "Scared." That one word broke something inside me. My strong, proud father was scared, and despite everything that had happened between us, I was the person he had listed as his emergency contact. Even after 3 years of silence, even after disowning me, somewhere deep down, he still considered me family. I stayed with him through the night. Nurses came and went, checking his vitals, adjusting his medications, and explaining what each monitor was tracking. I found myself slipping back into the role I had played during my mother's illness: translator, advocate, the person who asked the difficult questions when the patient couldn't. As the night wore on, my father drifted in and out of sleep. During his waking moments, he would look at me with confusion, as if he couldn't quite believe I was there. Sometimes he would try to speak, but the stroke had significantly impaired his ability to form words. I could see the frustration in his eyes when he couldn't communicate what he was thinking. Around 3 a.m., a young resident came in to check on him. As she examined him, she asked me about his medical history, current medications, and living situation. It was then that I realized how little I knew about my father's life over the past 3 years. "Does he live alone?" the resident asked. I think so," I admitted. "We haven't spoken in a while." "What about other family members? Siblings? Children?" "I'm his only child. His parents are deceased, and he has a brother in California, but they're not close." The resident made notes in his chart. "The social worker will want to speak with you tomorrow about discharge planning. Stroke patients often need significant support during recovery, especially in the first few months." After she left, I sat in the darkness of the hospital room, listening to the steady beeping of the monitors and my father's labored breathing. Discharge planning, support during recovery. The implications were starting to sink in. My father, who had always been fiercely independent, was going to need help with basic daily activities. He would need someone to drive him to appointments, help him with physical therapy, possibly assist with personal care. I thought about his house in River Oaks, the grand 2-story home where I had grown up. It had stairs, which would be impossible for him to navigate with his current mobility issues. The master bedroom was on the 2nd floor, and the kitchen was large and open, not ideal for someone learning to manage with limited use of one hand. Over the next few days, I found myself falling into a routine. I would drive to Houston early in the morning, spend the day at the hospital, and return to Austin in the evening. I had to use vacation time from work, and my supervisor was understanding but concerned about how long I might need to be away. During those hospital days, I watched my father struggle with tasks that had once been automatic. Simple things like drinking water or adjusting his position in bed required tremendous effort and often assistance from the nursing staff. Physical therapists worked with him to regain movement in his left arm and leg, and speech therapists helped him practice forming words clearly. The stroke had not only affected his physical abilities, but also his emotional regulation. I witnessed him become frustrated to the point of tears when he couldn't make himself understood, and angry when he couldn't perform simple tasks independently. The man who had once commanded operating rooms and made life or death decisions was now struggling to hold a spoon. On the 3rd day, the hospital social worker, Janet Rodriguez, asked to speak with me privately. She was a woman about my age with compassionate eyes and a direct manner that I appreciated. "Your father is going to need significant support when he's discharged," she began. "His insurance will cover some in-home physical therapy and occupational therapy, but he's going to need someone to help coordinate his care and assist with daily activities." "What are the options?" I asked. "Well, there are assisted living facilities that specialize in stroke recovery, but most patients recover better in familiar environments. Having a family member or hired caregiver in the home is often the best option if it's feasible." I knew what she was getting at. "You're asking if I can take care of him." "I'm asking if it's something you've considered. I know family dynamics can be complicated, but from what I've observed, your father seems calmer and more cooperative when you're here." That evening, I sat beside my father's bed, watching him sleep. The swelling in his face had gone down, and I could see more of the man I remembered from my childhood. But he looked older than his 68 years and more fragile than I had ever imagined possible. When he woke up, his speech was a little clearer. "Sarah," he said, looking directly at me, You don't have to stay." "I know," I replied, "but I want to." He closed his eyes again, and I saw his jaw tighten, the same expression he used to make when he was trying not to cry. When he opened his eyes, he struggled to form his next words. "I was wrong," he whispered. "About everything." Those 4 words hung in the air between us, carrying the weight of 3 years of silence and hurt. I felt tears welling up in my eyes as I reached out and took his good hand in mine. "Dad, we both said things we didn't mean. He shook his head weakly. No, I meant what I said. At the time, I was angry, disappointed, but I was wrong. Over the next hour, in halting, difficult speech, my father told me what his life had been like since our fight. He had thrown himself into his work even more intensely, taking on additional patients and hospital responsibilities. He had avoided social situations where people might ask about me. He had kept my bedroom exactly as I had left it when I went to college, but he had removed all the family photos from the living room because seeing them reminded him of his failure as a father. I missed you, he admitted, his words coming slowly but clearly. Every day. But I was too proud to call, too ashamed. I missed you too, Dad. So much. He squeezed my hand with his good hand. Your work, the social work. I looked it up. I read about what you do. I'm proud of you. Those words broke something loose inside me that had been locked away for 3 years. I put my head down on his bed and cried for the lost time, for the stubborn pride that had kept us apart, for the fear that I might have lost him before we could reconcile. When I finally composed myself, I looked up to find him watching me with tears in his own eyes. Dad, I said, I want to take care of you. If you'll let me, I want to help you get better. He was quiet for a long moment, and I could see him struggling with the idea of being dependent on anyone, especially the daughter he had pushed away. It won't be easy, he finally said. I'm not the same person I was. Neither am I replied. But maybe that's okay. Maybe we can figure out who we are now, together. He nodded slowly, and for the first time since I had arrived at the hospital, I saw something that looked like hope in his eyes. There's something else, I said. I think you should come stay with me in Austin, at least initially. Your house has too many stairs, and I can work from home part-time to help coordinate your care. His eyebrows raised in surprise. Your apartment is tiny, I know. We'll figure it out. Or maybe we can find a temporary place that works better for both of us. The important thing is that you won't be alone. As I drove back to Austin that night, I called my supervisor to explain the situation and request an extended leave of absence. I called my landlord to ask about breaking my lease. I started mentally calculating the logistics of completely rearranging my life to care for my father. It wasn't going to be easy. I was about to become a caregiver for the man who had raised me, who had taught me to be strong and independent, who was now going to need help with the most basic aspects of daily life. We would have to navigate not only his physical recovery, but also the emotional wounds that had kept us apart for 3 years. But as I drove through the Texas night, I felt something I hadn't experienced in a long time. I felt like I was exactly where I was supposed to be, doing exactly what I was meant to do. My father needed me, and despite everything that had happened between us, I needed him too. The journey ahead would test both of us in ways we couldn't yet imagine, but at least we would face it together. Moving my father from the hospital to my small one-bedroom apartment in Austin was like trying to fit a Texas Longhorn into a smart car. Theoretically possible, but requiring some creative problem-solving and a lot of patience. The discharge process alone took 3 days longer than expected because we had to arrange for medical equipment, coordinate with insurance companies, and wait for approval for home health services. I had spent the week before his discharge frantically apartment hunting, finally finding a ground-floor 2-bedroom rental in Cedar Park that was wheelchair accessible and close to good medical facilities. The rent was nearly double what I was paying for my tiny place, but I figured we'd make it work somehow. On moving day, I watched my father navigate from the wheelchair to the passenger seat of my Honda Civic, a car that suddenly seemed ridiculously small for a man who was used to driving his BMW sedan. Everything about this transition was humbling for him, from needing help with his seatbelt to having to rest every few steps during the walk to the front door of our new place. It's temporary, I kept reminding him as we settled into the apartment. Just until you get stronger. But we both knew that temporary might last longer than either of us anticipated. The first few weeks were a crash course in caregiving that no amount of social work training had prepared me for. My father needed assistance with basic tasks that I had taken for granted: buttoning his shirts, cutting his food, even getting dressed in the morning. The man who had once performed delicate heart surgeries now struggled to tie his shoes. I had arranged for physical therapy 3 times a week and occupational therapy twice a week. Watching my father work with the therapists was both inspiring and heartbreaking. His determination was evident, but so was his frustration when his body wouldn't cooperate with his mind's commands. "Lift your left arm up to shoulder height, Dr. Morrison," the physical therapist Marcus would instruct. My father would concentrate intensely, his face reddening with effort, and manage to raise his arm perhaps halfway to the target before it would fall back to his side. "Good progress," Marcus would say encouragingly. "That's better than last week." But I could see in my father's eyes that better than last week wasn't good enough for a man who had spent his entire career striving for perfection. The speech therapy sessions were particularly challenging. My father had been a gifted communicator, known for his ability to explain complex medical procedures to patients and their families in terms they could understand. Now, he had to practice basic exercises like repeating simple phrases and working on tongue and lip movements to improve his articulation. "The quick brown fox," he would slowly repeat after the speech therapist, his words coming out thick and sometimes unclear. I could see him growing frustrated when he couldn't express complex thoughts or when people couldn't understand what he was trying to say. More than once, I found him sitting alone in his room after therapy sessions, staring out the window with a defeated expression. But it wasn't just his physical limitations that were challenging. It was learning to live together again after 3 years of estrangement. We were both different people than we had been before our fight, and we had to figure out how to coexist in a small space while dealing with the stress of his recovery. My father had always been an early riser, awake by 5:30 a.m. and ready to start his day. The stroke hadn't changed that, but now his mornings were complicated by the need for medications, physical exercises, and assistance with basic personal care. I found myself getting up at 5 a.m. to help him with his morning routine before starting my own day. I had negotiated with my employer to work from home 4 days a week, going into the office only on Fridays. This meant our living room doubled as my office, with my laptop set up on the dining table and client files scattered across the kitchen counter. It wasn't ideal, but it allowed me to be available when my father needed assistance while still maintaining some income. The first major challenge came during his 3rd week home. I was on a video call with a client, a teenage mother who was struggling to regain custody of her son, when I heard a crash from the bathroom. I quickly muted my microphone and rushed to check on my father. I found him on the bathroom floor, his walker tipped over beside him. He had been trying to shower independently and had lost his balance. The look of embarrassment and shame on his face was almost more than I could bear. "Dad, are you hurt?" I asked, kneeling beside him to check for injuries. "I'm fine," he said gruffly, but I could see he had scraped his elbow and was shaking from the fall. Getting him up from the floor and back into his wheelchair required help from our neighbor, Mr. Peterson, a retired firefighter who heard the commotion through our thin walls. After we got my father settled and I had bandaged his elbow, I had to call my client back and reschedule our session. That evening, we had our first real conversation about the realities of his condition. "I can't live like this," he said, his voice heavy with defeat. "I'm a burden to you. I can't do anything for myself." "You're not a burden, Dad. You're recovering from a stroke. This is part of the process." "What if this is as good as it gets?" he asked. "What if I never get better than this?" It was a question I had been asking myself, but hadn't voiced. The doctors had been cautiously optimistic about his recovery, but they had also warned that the first 6 months were critical, and that some deficits might be permanent. "Then we'll adapt," I said. "We'll figure out how to make it work." He looked at me with tears in his eyes. "Why are you doing this? After what I did to you, why are you here?" I had been asking myself the same question, especially during the difficult days when he was irritable from pain and medication. or when I felt overwhelmed by the constant responsibility of caregiving. "Because you're my father," I said simply. "And because I love you, even when you're being impossible." That conversation marked a turning point in our relationship. My father began to accept help more graciously, and he started opening up about his fears and frustrations instead of keeping them bottled up inside. We also began talking about the past, not just our fight 3 years earlier, but our entire relationship. He told me about how difficult it had been to raise me alone after my mother died, how he had thrown himself into work because he didn't know how to deal with his grief while still being the parent I needed. "I wanted you to be a doctor because I thought it would give you security," he admitted one evening as we watched the sunset from our small patio. "I thought if you followed my path, you'd never have to worry about money or respect or having a purpose. I didn't understand that you needed to find your own purpose." "I know," I said. "And I understand now that when I dropped out of medical school, it probably felt like I was rejecting everything you had worked for, everything you had taught me." "It did," he acknowledged, "but I was wrong to make it about me. Your life isn't my life. Your dreams don't have to be my dreams." These conversations happened gradually, often during the quiet moments between therapy sessions or medical appointments. We were both learning to communicate in new ways, he because of his speech difficulties, and me because I was discovering parts of my father I had never known existed. One of the most surprising discoveries was his sense of humor about his situation. As his speech improved, he began making jokes about his limitations. When he spilled soup on his shirt because his left hand couldn't hold the spoon steady, he would say, "Well, at least I'm hitting my target. It's just not the one I was aiming for." When the physical therapist commented on his progress with walking, he replied, "I'm not walking so much as negotiating with gravity, and some days gravity wins." These moments of levity made the difficult days more bearable and reminded me of the father I had grown up with, the one who could find something to laugh about even in the most challenging circumstances. But it wasn't all progress and reconciliation. There were setbacks that tested both of us. 6 weeks into his recovery, my father developed a severe case of depression, a common complication after stroke that his doctors had warned us about, but that still caught us off guard. For nearly 2 weeks, he barely spoke, except to answer direct questions. He stopped participating actively in his therapy sessions and began sleeping most of the day. I would find him staring blankly at the television, not really watching anything, just letting the noise fill the silence. "I'm never going to be the same," he said during one of his darkest moments. "I can't practice medicine anymore. I can't drive. I can't even shower without help." "What's the point?" I had dealt with depression in my clients, but it was different when it was your own father sitting in that dark place. I encouraged him to talk to his doctor about antidepressant medication, and I arranged for him to see a counselor who specialized in helping stroke survivors adjust to their new realities. Slowly, with professional help and the support of his medical team, he began to emerge from the depression. The turning point came when his occupational therapist suggested he might be ready to start driving again, with some modifications to his car. The look of hope that crossed his face when she mentioned driving was the first genuine smile I had seen from him in weeks. Independence, even limited independence, was something he could work toward. The driving evaluation took place on a warm day in May, about 4 months after his stroke. I sat in the waiting room of the rehabilitation center, more nervous than I had been during any of his medical procedures. Driving represented so much more than transportation for my father. It was freedom, autonomy, and a step toward reclaiming his identity. When he emerged from the evaluation center with a huge grin on his face and the keys to his modified BMW, now equipped with hand controls, I felt like we had reached another milestone in his recovery. "I passed," he announced proudly. "I can drive again with some restrictions, but I can drive." That evening, he insisted on taking me out to dinner, our first restaurant meal since his stroke. It was a simple family restaurant near our apartment. Nothing fancy, but watching my father navigate ordering from the menu and engaging in conversation with our server felt like a celebration. "Thank you," he said as we shared dessert. "For everything. for taking care of me, for not giving up on me, for forgiving me. Thank you for letting me, I replied, for trusting me to help you get through this. As we drove home that night, with him behind the wheel for the first time in months, I realized that somewhere in the process of caring for my father, I had discovered something I hadn't expected. Taking care of him wasn't just helping him heal. It was healing me too. The anger and hurt I had carried for 3 years had gradually transformed into something deeper and more meaningful. We weren't just father and daughter anymore. We had become partners in his recovery, allies in facing an uncertain future together. But our biggest challenges were still ahead of us, and neither of us knew just how much our newfound relationship would be tested in the months to come. 8 months after my father's stroke, just as we were settling into a routine that felt sustainable, life threw us another curveball. It was a Tuesday morning in November when he came out of his bedroom looking pale and shaky, complaining of chest pain and shortness of breath. "It's probably nothing," he said, trying to downplay his symptoms in the way that doctors often do when they become patients. "Maybe just some indigestion from last night's dinner." But I had learned to read the signs of his distress over the months of caring for him, and this was different from his usual complaints about stroke-related discomfort. This looked like fear. "Dad, we're going to the emergency room," I said, already reaching for my keys and his medication list. "Sarah, I'm fine, it's just..." "No arguments. You taught me that chest pain in a man your age is never just anything. We're going. Now." The drive to the hospital felt like déjà vu, except this time I was the one insisting on medical attention while he protested. The irony wasn't lost on either of us, the emergency room staff at St. David's Medical Center took his symptoms seriously, immediately running an EKG and drawing blood to check his cardiac enzymes. While we waited for results, my father lay on the gurney looking smaller and more vulnerable than ever. "I'm scared," he admitted quietly, echoing the same words he had spoken after his stroke. "I know," I said, taking his good hand in mine. "But whatever this is, we'll face it together, just like we did before." The results showed that he had experienced a mild heart attack, what the cardiologist called a warning shot. His arteries were significantly blocked, and he would need immediate cardiac catheterization and possibly stent placement. As they wheeled him into the cardiac catheterization lab, he looked up at me with an expression I'll never forget. "Sarah, if something happens..." "Nothing's going to happen," I interrupted firmly. "You're going to be fine, and then you're going to come home and complain about the hospital food and argue with the nurses about your discharge instructions." He managed a weak smile. "I love you, sweetheart. I love you too, Dad. I'll be right here when you wake up." The procedure took 2 hours. I spent that time pacing the cardiac waiting room, drinking terrible coffee, and calling his doctors to coordinate his care. It struck me how much had changed since his stroke. I now knew all his medications, his medical history, his insurance information, and which doctors to contact in an emergency. I had become his medical advocate without even realizing it. When Dr. Kumar, the interventional cardiologist, finally came to speak with me, his expression was cautiously optimistic. "The procedure went well," he said. "We placed 2 stents in his coronary arteries. The blockages were significant, 85% in one artery and 70% in another. He was lucky this wasn't a massive heart attack." "What does this mean for his recovery?" "He's already dealing with the effects of his stroke." "It's going to be challenging," Dr. Kumar admitted. "Cardiac rehabilitation on top of stroke recovery will require careful coordination. But the good news is that his heart function should improve significantly now that we've restored blood flow to those areas." Over the next few days in the hospital, I watched my father grapple with this new reality. Just when he had been making real progress with his stroke recovery, he now faced another set of limitations and another long rehabilitation process. "I feel like my body is falling apart piece by piece," he said during one of his darker moments. "First the stroke, now my heart. What's next?" "Maybe nothing's next," I suggested. Maybe this is your body's way of telling you to slow down and take better care of yourself. You've spent 40 years taking care of other people's hearts. Now it's time to take care of your own. The cardiac rehabilitation program started 3 weeks after his stent placement. Unlike the stroke recovery, which had been mostly about regaining lost function, cardiac rehab was about building strength and endurance he hadn't had in years. The irony was that in some ways, the heart attack might have been the best thing that could have happened to him. It forced him to address cardiovascular issues that had been building up for decades. Watching my father on the treadmill at cardiac rehab, slowly walking at 2.5 miles per hour with electrodes monitoring his heart rhythm, I was struck by how far we had both come. A year earlier, I had been estranged from him, living my own life in Austin, and trying to forget that I even had a father. Now, I knew his target heart rate, his blood pressure medications, and exactly how many minutes he could exercise before needing to rest. But more than that, I had discovered aspects of my father I never knew existed. Caring for him had revealed his vulnerability, his humor in the face of adversity, and his capacity for growth and change. The man who had once been rigid and controlling had learned to accept help gracefully and to appreciate things he had previously taken for granted. One evening in December, about a month into his cardiac rehab program, we were sitting on our small patio, watching the sunset, when he brought up a topic that had been weighing on both our minds. "Sarah, I've been thinking about the future," he said. "About what happens next." "What do you mean?" "I mean, you've put your life on hold for almost a year to take care of me. You're 31 years old. You should be focused on your career, maybe thinking about marriage, having children. Instead, you're spending your evenings helping me sort my pill organizer and driving me to doctor appointments." I had been thinking about the same things, but hearing him voice them made me realize how much my priorities had shifted over the past year. "Dad, taking care of you hasn't been putting my life on hold. It's been part of my life, an important part." "But what about your work, your career, the families you were helping?" It was true that I missed the direct client work I'd been doing before his stroke. Working from home had allowed me to maintain some connection with my job, but it wasn't the same as being in the field, working directly with families in crisis. "I've actually been thinking about that," I said. "What if I told you I've been considering starting my own practice, specializing in helping families navigate medical crises and caregiving situations?" His eyes widened with interest. "Really?" "Everything I've learned this year about insurance systems, coordinating medical care, advocating for patients, helping families adapt to sudden changes. It's exactly what families need when they're thrown into situations like ours. Most people have no idea how to navigate the healthcare system when their loved one has a stroke or heart attack." That's a brilliant idea, Sarah. You could help so many families." I know it would mean starting over financially, building a client base, dealing with the uncertainty of running my own business. But I think I could make a real difference. "You already have made a real difference," he said quietly. "You saved my life. Not just medically, but in every way that matters. You gave me back my daughter, and you gave me a reason to get better." As winter turned to spring, my father's progress in both stroke and cardiac rehabilitation exceeded everyone's expectations. His speech had returned to about 90% of normal, and while he still had some weakness on his left side, he had regained enough function to live independently with minimal assistance. More importantly, we had developed a relationship that was deeper and more honest than anything we had shared before his health crises. We talked openly about his fears, his regrets, and his hopes for the future. He had become one of my closest friends and strongest supporters. In March, exactly 1 year after his stroke, he made an announcement that surprised both of us. "I want to volunteer," he said over breakfast one morning. "Volunteer where?" "At the stroke support group at the rehabilitation center, and maybe at the cardiac rehab program too. I want to help other people who are going through what I went through." The idea of my father, who had always been somewhat reserved and private about his emotions, sharing his experience with strangers was remarkable, but it made perfect sense. Who better to help someone navigate the challenges of stroke recovery than someone who had lived through it himself? His first day volunteering at the stroke support group was emotional for both of us. I drove him there and waited in the parking lot, not sure how he would handle talking about his experience with other survivors and their families. When he came out an hour and a half later, his eyes were bright with excitement and purpose. There was a man there, about my age, who had his stroke 6 months ago, he told me as we drove home. He was so angry, so frustrated with his limitations. I told him about my first few months, about the depression, about feeling like my life was over. I think it helped him to know he wasn't alone. How did it feel, talking about everything? Healing, he said simply. It felt healing. Over the following months, my father became a regular fixture at both the stroke and cardiac support groups. Families would specifically ask for him when they had questions about recovery or needed someone to talk to who truly understood what they were going through. Meanwhile, I had begun the process of starting my own consulting practice. I started small, offering services to help families coordinate care for elderly or disabled relatives. Word spread quickly through the medical community, and soon I had more clients than I could handle working part-time. The day I officially resigned from my old job to launch Morrison Family Care Consulting was both terrifying and exhilarating. My father insisted on taking me out to celebrate, driving us to the same restaurant where we had shared our first meal out after his stroke evaluation. "I'm proud of you," he said as we toasted with iced tea. "Your mother would be proud too. You've taken everything you learned from taking care of me and turned it into a way to help other families. That's exactly what she would have done." "I learned from the best," I replied. "Both of you taught me that taking care of people isn't just about medical knowledge or professional skills. It's about showing up, being present, and not giving up even when things get difficult." 2 years after his stroke, my father had regained enough independence to move into his own apartment, a ground-floor unit in a senior living community that offered some assistance if needed, but allowed him to maintain his autonomy. I helped him move and set up his new place, making sure he had all the safety equipment and medical supplies he might need. The night before he moved out of our shared apartment, we sat together on the patio one last time, watching the sunset and reflecting on everything that had happened. "Do you ever regret it?" he asked. "Taking care of me, I mean. Changing your whole life for someone who had treated you so badly?" "Never," I said without hesitation. "Not once. Taking care of you taught me more about myself, about love, about family, than anything else I've ever done. It showed me what I'm capable of, and it gave me a career that I'm passionate about. It gave me back my daughter," he said. "And it taught me that pride and stubbornness are poor substitutes for love and forgiveness." We both learned that lesson, I agreed. As I write this story now, 3 years after my father's stroke, our relationship continues to evolve and deepen. We have dinner together every Sunday, just like we used to when I was growing up, but now our conversations are richer and more honest. We talk about everything: his volunteer work with stroke survivors, my growing business, his memories of my mother, our hopes for the future. My business has grown beyond anything I initially imagined. I now employ 2 other consultants and work with families throughout Central Texas, helping them navigate medical crises, coordinate care for aging parents, and adapt to sudden changes in their loved one's health. Every client teaches me something new, but the foundation of everything I do comes from those months of caring for my father. Last month, I received a letter from Maria, the teenage girl I had worked with years earlier, whose father had kicked her out when she became pregnant. She had tracked me down through my new business website to tell me that she and her father had reconciled, and that her daughter, now 3 years old, had brought them closer together than they had ever been. "You told me once that families can heal from almost anything if both people are willing to do the work," she wrote. "I didn't believe you then, but I do now. Thank you for not giving up on me or my family." Her letter reminded me of something I had learned during my father's recovery. Second chances aren't just given, they're earned. Both people have to be willing to do the hard work of forgiveness, communication, and change. Sometimes it takes a crisis to create the opportunity for that work to begin. My father still has limitations from his stroke. His left hand will never have full strength, and he tires more easily than he used to. But he has found new purpose in helping other families navigate medical crises, and he approaches each day with a gratitude and appreciation for life that he never had before. As for me, I discovered that sometimes the most important work we do isn't the career we planned or the life we thought we wanted. Sometimes it's the unexpected detour that teaches us who we really are and what we're truly capable of. The man who once disowned me for following my heart became the person who taught me that love isn't just a feeling. It's a choice we make every day, especially when it's difficult. Taking care of him wasn't a sacrifice, it was a privilege. It wasn't putting my life on hold. It was discovering what my life was really supposed to be about. And in the end, caring for my father didn't just save his life, it saved mine too. It brought us both home to each other, and to a relationship that is stronger and more meaningful than anything we had before. Sometimes the people who hurt us the most are the same people who teach us the most about love, forgiveness, and what it really means to be family. Every Sunday when we sit down for dinner together, I'm reminded that some stories don't have perfect endings. They have real ones. And real endings are often better than perfect ones, because they're earned through struggle, seasoned with forgiveness, and strengthened by the knowledge that we chose to fight for each other when it would have been easier to walk away. My father disowned me once, but life gave us a second chance to get it right. And this time, we didn't waste it. Thank you for watching our story. If you're dealing with a similar situation with a family member, remember that healing is possible, forgiveness is a choice, and sometimes the hardest conversations lead to the most beautiful relationships. Please share your own stories of family reconciliation in the comments below. And don't forget to subscribe for more real-life stories of hope, healing, and second chances.